Before we dive in, I want to let you know about a new book you're definitely going to want to check out. It's called Why Brains Need Friends, The Neuroscience of Social Connection, and it's by Dr. Ben Rein, who's a Stanford-trained neuroscientist and the guest for this 3-part series. In these conversations, we explore the science of connection, why relationships are essential for brain health, and how building stronger social bonds can actually protect us against stress and even disease. So if you enjoy what you hear in these episodes, you will absolutely love the book. It's available now wherever books are sold. Okay, let's jump into today's episode.
The U.S. Surgeon General today declared a new public health epidemic in America: loneliness. A new report from his office finds loneliness can have profound effects on mental health as well as heart disease, stroke, and dementia. It tracks a decline in social connections and links all of this to billions of dollars in healthcare costs. Dr. Vivek Murthy.
Why is this happening? And more importantly, how do we fix it? I brought in Stanford neuroscientist Dr. Ben Rein to help us unpack what loneliness does to our brain and how we can heal from it in a world of social media, dating apps, and digital disconnection. Because here's the truth. Loneliness isn't just an emotion. It's a signal from your brain, as real and urgent as hunger or thirst. And when we ignore it, the consequences ripple through our mental health, our physical health, and even how long we live. In this series, we're going to help you understand the neuroscience of loneliness, happiness, and even empathy. And most importantly, how you can use this knowledge to build a healthier and happier life. Now here's where it gets interesting. Science only tells half the story. To understand what really drives Ben Rein's passion for this work, what makes him fight so hard to help people reconnect, we need to go back to where it all began, his childhood.
So my journey in neuroscience, I think, started very young, well before I knew I was interested in neuroscience, because I was interested in behavior. When I was a little kid, I remember always just thinking it was so interesting that everyone acts differently, and that specifically when it comes to social behavior, that what I thought about as a kid was, I'm looking around my cafeteria and it's just so cool that that table is really loud and everyone's really outgoing. And at that table, no one's really talking and there's only a few kids and they're all reading books. And then there's everywhere in between. And I thought it's so fascinating that everyone's just different like that. And I was trying to figure out where I stood on that spectrum. And growing up, I just kind of stayed interested in that until I got to college and decided to study psychology, because truthfully, I was afraid of neuroscience. I didn't think I could handle the molecular biology, biochemistry, genetics, all that stuff. So I chose psychology because I wanted to approximate studying that phenomenon, sociability. And then eventually, very long story, very short, I had a transformative nightmare that led me down the path of neuroscience.
I don't want the long story short. I want the real story. Where were you? Give me the moment of this nightmare and what was going on.
Okay. All right. So I was in my sophomore year as a psychology student, and I was on track to graduate in 3 years. And this is all helpful for painting the sort of placement of the nightmare. I was interested in neuroscience, but I didn't, like I described it, I wasn't confident enough to tackle it. So I was in psychology, wasn't really sure what I was going to be doing with my future, and I was on track to graduate early. So I had this nightmare where, I flash forward maybe 20, 30 years. I was an adult, I had a family, kids, dogs, house. But the scary part of the dream was that there was this basically a demon force that dominated my life. And I didn't see it. I couldn't see it, but I knew it was there. It was just kind of omnipresent. And whenever I did something that it didn't want me doing, it would punish me by transforming my body. I would just be mutilated. My skin would swell up and burst, or my arms would bend the wrong way. It was horrifying. And so naturally, that was a very strong incentive for me to basically obey the demon at all costs. So I was just controlled by this force. And I was miserable, but I did it for my family. I didn't want them to know about it. I don't know. It was this really difficult life. And then there was this one moment where I was in my house, I was by myself, and I heard a noise in the basement. And I just knew, apparently, this is the demon. It's telling me to go in the basement. So I go down there, and I suddenly understand that this force is about to present itself to me for the first time. I hadn't seen it all these years, but I knew that it was about to show itself. And it was just horrifying. I was down in this basement, the lights were off, and I felt that this monster was about to appear, and whatever it said, I had to obey, basically. Horrifying. And I remember my family came down just for dramatic effect. It was like raining and the power went out. And my kids were like, Dad, is it okay? Everything okay? And I was like, oh, it's fine. Don't worry, because I didn't want them to be scared. And so I was just sitting there with like my family on the line, about to confront this monster, full of adrenaline. And I woke up. I didn't get to meet it. But when I woke up, the first thing that I thought of was, how unbelievable is it that I can be fully immersed in a dream where I think I'm 40 years old. These are my kids. I love these kids. This is real. These are characters. All of this stuff, this complex piece of the dream is being built by my brain. And I have no idea that's happening inside my brain while I'm simultaneously acting with the world, this dreamscape, on a conscious level where I'm making decisions and I'm thinking about how to console my children. And I like the fact that all of these things were happening simultaneously within this one organ was both creating and experiencing this dreamscape blew my mind. And I was just like, I need to study neuroscience. I cannot evade it any longer. I need to change my career. So I got to do what I always wanted to do in studying the neuroscience of social behavior. And in the 10 years or so I spent behind research benches, I developed a real appreciation for the value of interaction and started to understand it in a very different way.
Wow. I think a lot of people have moments in their life where they feel like they need to pivot, but very few take a dream as a sign to actually make the change. So tell me, what is actually going on in our brains when we do dream?
So we don't really know. We think we know. I guess we have an idea of what's going on in terms of like brain waves and brain activity and all this, but as for the purpose of dreams, we don't know. I could tell you that my guess as a neuroscientist who doesn't study dreams, but this is my personal favorite, is that it's a simulation. Like, I think nightmares, if you think about why do we have nightmares, and of course I've thought a lot about this because of my life, nightmares are super evolutionarily disadvantageous. Why would you build in something to a period of rest that wakes you up? What's the purpose of that? And one potential explanation is that nightmares allow your brain to simulate horrible experiences so that you can have a slightly better judge of what you might do in that scenario. If you're having a nightmare of being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger in ancient times, you might recognize, oh, like this is a way I can get my knife under the ribs or something like that. It may not be real or accurate, but at least it gives you a slight advantage that if you're confronted with that situation, you've been through it before. But the interesting thing about that is now, modern day, we're not being chased by saber-toothed tigers. Nowadays, the things that we have dreams about are reputational damage. Oh, my teeth are going to fall out and I'm going to look silly, or I'm going to show up naked to class, or all these things that are your brain simulating all these things that could hurt your social reputation, because as I'm sure we're going to get into, social interaction is very important for the brain. And being in good standing with your tribe and your community is important. So if you show up in your underpants, you're screwed.
That's actually super interesting. I never thought of it like that. It's almost like our brain's way of training us for potentially what could happen and hopefully avoiding that mistake from happening in the future.
Right. Exactly.
Wow. So cool. So cool. Okay. So that's not why we're here to talk. We're not here to talk about dreams, even though it's a big part of your story. So let's move into really the premise of this conversation. And my understanding is that we know that connection's important. Some could even argue that we're more connected than ever before, but yet there's this idea that we are lonelier. So my first question, is that truth? Are we actually lonelier than we have been in the past?
Yes, 100%. If you look at the data and how many friends people have, how much time people spend alone, month by month or day by day, the numbers are real. People are definitely spending less time with others.
And is that the definition of loneliness?
Okay, so good question. Technically, that's the definition of isolation. So isolation is the objective state of being by yourself, right? You are isolated. But loneliness is defined by feeling it, basically. So you can be lonely in a crowd. If you go to a concert, let's say you're supposed to go to a concert with a buddy, and then that person says, "Hey, I'm so sorry, you can't make it tonight." You end up going to the concert by yourself. You're surrounded by thousands of people, but you're completely alone. You can feel lonely in a crowd, but you can't be isolated in a crowd.
Oh, interesting. Okay. If we're saying that we notice that people are getting lonelier, is this actually a problem?
Yes, it is. And the reason, the broad reason or justification for that is that being isolated or lonely, by the way, that they have the two definitions have both been studied and both are bad, although they are slightly different, which is interesting. Both of these things contribute to just general health decline, you might say. Like people who are more isolated are at higher risk for anxiety, depression, heart disease, dementia, suicidality. They have a lower pain threshold. And when you lump that all together and you just do a study of tracking people over the course of some time and looking at just pure mortality, how likely are they to die by any cause? Studies have shown anywhere between 32 or to 50% higher likelihood of death by any cause in people who are isolated. So that's the broad strokes of like, why does this matter? Well, it's literally life or death. But when we zoom in on the biology of it, you can start to piece together an explanation of what's really going on here. So isolation or loneliness are forms of stress. Being alone is stressful. And it's probably because, I was alluding to this, if you're cast out from your tribe in an ancient world where your food is scarce and you're being hunted by predators, you're very likely to die. You're much more likely to die alone than with a group. And so it's probable that the stress we experience when we're isolated is a evolutionary mechanism that's meant to set off the alarm bells and motivate you to get back to your community. But the problem is, we live in this world now where people are getting more and more isolated. We're spending less and less time together. And for many reasons, it's not just that Friday, Saturday nights, I'd rather hang out on the couch. Sometimes that's the case, but also just throughout the week, throughout our lives, we can order groceries on Instacart instead of going to the grocery store. You can do a telemedicine visit. You can do a podcast virtually. You could tour a house virtually instead of going through it. You can, I don't know if I already said this, remote work. We spend a day or two per day without going to the office. We're at home. You can work out on Peloton or whatever at home without seeing people at the gym. There's so many places where we've taken human interaction and replaced it with some form of convenient automation. And when that stacks up over time, that can be a problem because if you spend a couple days alone, you're triggering maybe this short-term stress response. And when you spend a long period alone, like during COVID, or like some people who are like isolated seniors, people who live alone and they hardly see others, that's where it's really the worst, because this chronic isolation is effectively chronic stress. It triggers a stress response in the brain and body. It drives cortisol levels up. And so what we see in chronic stress is that chronic stress can lead to chronic inflammation throughout the brain and body. And that's largely because cortisol, and sorry if this is overly molecular, but for those who care, here it is. Cortisol, when in short-term bursts, is anti-inflammatory because when you're stressed, cortisol goes up, and cortisol says, okay, we have some challenge going on. It's time to ready the troops. We need to be prepared for a challenge. So let's push down this inflammation and be ready for a fight or whatever we need to do to run or fight, flight, or freeze. So it's anti-inflammatory, cortisol. But with chronic stress, when you're exposed to high cortisol levels for a long time, eventually the body can't just always be suppressing inflammation. The tissues desensitize to the cortisol. And so this cortisol basically loses its anti-inflammatory properties. And that's how you can result in chronic inflammation, in chronic isolation, long-term isolation. And that is really bad because when you have inflammation in your tissues, it basically disrupts the regular biological function. And is the inflammation itself killing us? Maybe, I'm not sure. But one thing it's definitely doing is making us less resilient. So, for instance, if you suffer a heart attack or a stroke, if you have inflammation, chronic inflammation, it may impair the recovery from that, which may increase your likelihood of dying from that adverse event. So there's actually some unbelievable studies I reference in the book. My friend, Dr. Joshua Krapser, he's a researcher at Stanford. When he was at UT Houston, they were studying stroke recovery in mice. So they would induce a stroke by basically blocking this artery. And it's a very controlled procedure. They would block the artery for a set amount of time, maybe 60 seconds. And during that time, it was simulating a stroke. Blood flow would be inhibited to the brain. And so there would be some area of brain damage, right? And it's a very replicable thing, right? The stroke should look basically identical across each mouse because they're going through the exact same stroke. But what they found was that some of their mice had worse strokes. They literally had more brain damage. There were more dead cells in the brain. So what's going on? They found that the mice that had worse strokes were living in single cages. They were alone. And the mice that had better strokes, or not as bad strokes, were living in group housing. And they also found that those that were isolated, they didn't just have worse, larger strokes, but they also had worse recovery. They were more likely to die. They struggled with motor coordination and stuff after. And it's unbelievable to me that you can go through the exact same insult, to your medical term insult, the same damage to your body, and it could be worse if you're isolated. And what they found is that when they blocked these inhibitory signals in the brain in those isolated mice, they no longer showed that larger damage. So by suppressing the inflammation, they shrunk the size of the stroke, basically, which to me is pretty good evidence that the isolation-induced inflammation is what's basically setting the body up for failure and making us much less resilient in the face of challenges like strokes or heart attacks or whatever.
Wow, that's crazy. That's not something that you can really reproduce on a human scale, but the mechanism behind it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of some examples of like extreme isolation within human. And maybe you have some examples, but one that comes to mind is a show that I love called Alone. So what they do is they take these survivalists and they put them out alone into the wilderness. They get like 10 things that they can bring with us, and then it's just up to them to survive. And what I find really fascinating is that you have some people that just don't have their survival skills, like they just can't handle it. But then you have the other ones that have the survival skills, and they can have unlimited access to food, water, and shelter. And what ends up happening is you get these people, the finalists that get there, but loneliness or the lack of social interaction ends up causing them to quit. So what do you think is happening to those people?
Yeah, so being isolated is uncomfortable, right? If you think about, imagine a world right now. I want you to really dive into this thought experiment. Imagine a world where there are no other human beings. It's just you. Imagine your day-to-day. Your family's gone. Your coworkers are gone. You listen to the radio, there's nothing. It's static. You want to listen to music, there's no music. There's no human contact. That probably feels like stress, right? It's not a good feeling at all. That's effectively a mental representation of how the body processes isolation. It's stress. It's stressful to be alone. And so in these people who are going through this and really suffering, it's challenging. It's the reason why COVID had the COVID isolation protocols were associated with such severe depression and anxiety. And that was also a microcosm of the study showing that people who isolated alone or for longer periods showed more severe depression scores during COVID. And those people on that show, I'm sure they're going through it. Another example of that is solitary confinement, in which it's used because it's torture, right? Being held by yourself, it makes you go nuts. A really terrifying statistic is that who were put into solitary confinement for any duration of their time in jail are 78% more likely to commit suicide in the year after their release. 78% more likely from any time spent in solitary confinement. I think that also shows you it triggers a stress response, and stress is bad. It really, when you have your body telling you something's wrong, make it go away, and there's nothing you can do to restore the homeostasis to that system for an extended time, it changes you.
Wow. I actually think that the prison system is probably an amazing use case for this, because just looking at the US, our recidivism rate of people returning back to jail is really high, showing that the method that we're using of putting these people and isolating them, it's not actually leading to change.
Right.
And do you think that there's a better system for something like that?
Yeah, I think you've heard about different proposals. I'm laughing because one of them was like something wild. I made a video about it on Instagram, TikTok. They were like using AI to simulate life experiences and implant memories in the brains of prisoners. And I was like, this is nuts. Bad idea. But I think better, more sensible idea is involving basically counseling, education, like offering social support for people who are looking to change their behaviors, right? I don't think punishment, especially in the format of imprisonment, is going to be effective at helping someone change their behaviors. Maybe it is. It's definitely time to reflect. It's definitely a strong incentive to not commit a crime. I would hate to go to prison, and I feel for those who have been in prison or are, but I don't think at all that there's enough support provided. And I do think that education and support, you throw someone out of jail back into the real world, and they're expected to get a job and have their life in order. There should be as much support for that person as possible as they re-enter life.
So when we're talking about interaction, you're saying that it can reduce the potential for chronic stress, increased prolonged exposure to cortisol. But What about beyond that? Are we talking, is there benefits for his brain volume? And what is this idea of the interbrain synchrony? Where does that come into play?
Yeah, okay. So, to simplify isolation to purely stress would be wrong. There's more to it. That's like again, broad strokes. But on a micro level, there are studies showing that isolated people show differences in the function of certain brain areas. The way they process social information is different. It's really fascinating. And I get into that stuff. And there's a chapter about isolation in the book. But another thing to consider about like the other hand, why interaction is so important is because interaction, and again, this is just one of many reasons, interaction is basically like a full body workout for the brain. You are exercising so much of your brain. We kind of take interactions for granted as you're reading someone's facial expressions, body language, vocal tone, while also processing the information that they're sharing, while also trying to control your own, all of those things, social cues, the things you choose to say, deciding whether you should say this thing that your friend told you and you couldn't tell if it was a secret or not. There's so much to it, and you're engaging so many brain areas that probably because of that, there's evidence that people who are more socially engaged literally do have larger brains. They have more gray matter, which probably represents the fact that in the brain, it's the more you use brain circuits, the more you support their physical, biological development. And what I mean is synapses. Synapses are the connections between brain cells where neurotransmitters are sent and received. This is really like the mouth to ear connection between brain cells. And when two neurons are interacting a lot more, they might sprout new synapses. The synapses between those neurons might get stronger, might get bigger. And so these changes, as new synapses are grown or synapses are strengthened, that can lead to more gray matter. So that larger brain volume in socialized people may literally just reflect the fact that they are exercising their brain regularly. Just a person who works out more has larger muscles. It may not be as simple as that. It's probably not, but that's the way I see it at least. And because of that larger brain volume, it doesn't make you necessarily smarter or whatever. It might make you better at socializing. I'm sure it does. But it can serve as something called cognitive reserve, where this is the idea that the more brain tissue you have, the longer you will hold on to your mental acuity as you age. Because naturally, as we age, those very same synapses are atrophied, shrunken, dismantled, removed. Very sadly, this is just a natural part of aging. We lose synapses as we age. Our brains shrink progressively. It's the reason why you're not as sharp when you're 80 as you are when you're 25. But with more brain tissue, more synapses hanging around, because you've been social, you can better tolerate the loss of those synapses without losing the actual function of what those brain cells and synapses are doing. So you might be less vulnerable to dementia. You might not show as strong memory decline. And that's exactly what we do see, is that people who are more isolated and have dementia, their memory declines twice as fast as those who are more socialized. So that's just another one of those reasons why socializing is so valuable.
Thanks for listening to the MedStory podcast. In the next episode, Dr. Ben Rein takes us inside the hidden epidemic of loneliness, a crisis as dangerous to the body as smoking, and one that's spreading quietly through a world that's more connected than ever. That's next on this special series powered by the MedStory podcast.